Welcome everyone to our second plenary session of the NOAA AI workshop. I see people are still joining of this session, so I'm just going to give 1 more minute for this before we get started with this session. Just housekeeping that all sessions for both plenary and oral scientific session will be recorded and will be made available to the public 2 to 3 weeks after the workshop. We need to do some editing to remove some of the blank space and to make sure that everything is fine in the recordings. So you will be notified when the recording becomes available. So I think the number is still rapidly increasing. So I'm gonna start the introduction of our session today. So today is our great pleasure to have Dr. Elham Tabassi from NIST, who is the Chief of Staff in the Information Technology Laboratory at NIST and leads the NIST Trustworthy AI program. Information Technology Laboratory, or ITL, is one of the 6 research laboratories within NIST and supports NIST's mission to promote US innovation and industrial competitiveness by advancing measurement science, standards, and technology in ways that enhance economic security and improve our quality of life. ITL cultivates trust in information technology and metrology by conducting research, developing and disseminating standards, measurements, and testing for interoperability, security, usability, and reliability of information systems. As a scientist, Dr. Tabassi has been working on various computer vision research projects with applications in biometrics since 1999. She is a member of the National A.I. Research Resource Task Force, which has been mentioned several times during our opening plenary session. So this will be a great follow-up discussion with Dr. Tabassi. And she is also a fellow of the Washington Academy of Sciences and a senior member of IEEE. And today, Dr. Tabassi will talk about the trustworthy and responsible AI, risk management framework, standards, and evaluations. Before I turn the mic to Dr. Tabassi, I want to remind everyone that you can ask your questions using the Slido link that will be shared in the chat shortly, and we'll answer your questions after Dr. Tabassi's talk. Thank you. Please take it away.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thanks very much for the invitation. So if that's okay, I'm going to go share my screen to look at the presentation. And I need a little bit of, okay, I think you're seeing my screen.
Perfect. Okay,
very good. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depends on where you are logging in. My name is Elham Tabassi, and again, Doc, Tyler, and everybody at NOAA, thanks for the kind invitation to be here. It's a pleasure and honor to be here and speaking with all of you today about AI risk management, and a lot of happenings and activities around AI. I'm going to start by saying a few words about what NIST is. Many of you may know, but bear me on that. NIST is part of the Department of Commerce along our colleagues at NOAA. And we think of ourselves as the industry's national laboratory. And we have a very broad portfolio of research from building the world's most precise atomic clock to working collaboratively with industry to develop standards for example, use of robots in manufacturing to helping firefighters better prepare for and predict the behavior of wildfires. NIST has a long standing reputation for cultivating trust in technology by participating in development of standards and metrics, both domestically and internationally. Standards that strengthen measurement science and make technology, as Doug mentioned, more secure, usable, interoperable, reliable, or in other words, trustworthy. This work is critical in the AI space to ensure public trust of this rapidly evolving technology. We believe that the scientific and Research innovations in emerging technologies such as AI have the potential to uplift and empower all people. Yet the use of AI technologies are not without certain risks to individuals, users, or societies. And as you know, depend on the link you click on, the article you pick to read, there are exaggerations, the other end of spectrum, that this is the best thing and it's going to make the whole life a lot better, or it's the worst thing and has negative impact on the job, all the way to even it's a threat to humanity. And we all know that the truth is somewhere in between, and that's exactly what we are trying to do to understand the AI risks. So it's important to understand AI risk and their driver. And one challenge is that despite a consensus that there are several types of risk associated with AI, there hasn't yet been a concerted effort around establishing a taxonomy of AI risk, a taxonomy that can describe various types of risks, what they are, which stage of life cycle of AI they can present themselves to, and what we can do to manage those risks can help us to better test and manage AI. And eventually, through better understanding AI systems and better evaluations, build human trust in AI. So globally, researchers and developers and consumers all have expressed their desire to understand technical and societal risks related to AI. And while the policy landscape that governs this area is evolving continuously across the border here in the US and around the globe, at NIST, we try to provide scalable research-based method to assess the risk and advance trustworthy approaches to AI that can serve all people in a responsible, equitable, and beneficial way. As you heard from Lynn this morning, we were tasked by Congress, but also a lot of discussions and requests by industry to start and we launched that process a few months ago, a consensus-driven, open, transparent, and collaborative process to develop an AI risk management framework. Of course, like any other things that we do at NIST, we invite and encourage the active engagement of stakeholders, our scientists, our technologists, but also sociologists, psychologists, lawyers, so all type of stakeholders and collaborated in this process. And that's as an extension of our commitment to strengthen US technological leadership based on our shared democratic values. So what we're trying to do, so as I said, there is the policy landscapes is evolving, and then there are so many different principles documents. A couple of years ago, OECD put the AI principles that has been adopted by many countries, including the US. There has been different national countries that have come up with their AI principles. In US, OMB published their regulatory AI memo back in about a year ago, October last year, and then an executive order for use of the AI in government. One thing is that the good thing is that these documents, there is a lot of commonality, and all of them are based on human-centered, protecting human rights and democratic values. But these documents are still high-level, aspirational, value-based documents. And the opportunity for us, the tech community, is to get these value-based, high-level, aspirational principles and translate them, map them into technical requirements that could be designed in during the different phases of the AI and implement into the AI techniques, and also allows us to test AI systems against those requirements. So that's sort of roughly where we are trying to go. To understand trustworthy and responsible AI, the first question is, what constitutes trust? What trustworthiness means? And what type of characteristic and requirements a system should exhibit so that it's trustworthy. So that's the bottom layer on this pyramid, identifying building blocks or technical requirements. So the first thing is understanding what we want the system to have. So, I'll talk about it in my next slide a little bit more. Of course, the first thing is that we want the system to be accurate, but we all have heard about the different AI vulnerabilities. So we want to make sure that it is secure and privacy preserved, so the data, the training data is not at the risk of compromise, and the system is not is resilient to the different attacks and vulnerabilities. But we also wanted to not show biases. We wanted to be explainable. So I talk a little bit more in the next slide about the building blocks that we have come up with in collaborations with the community. Before going any further, I have to pause here and say that, as many of you know, there is a request for information out to help us that provide us with the input at development of this AI risk management framework. So everything that I'm presenting here is based on the research and engagement that we had in the past year and months with the community. And of course, as the responses to RFI is arriving, and as we look and analyze those comments, we will know more. So everything that I say is up to modifications and improvement per the comments that we got, including those building blocks. So, okay, so we got the answer the question of what constitutes trust or trustworthiness, and we come up with some building blocks that through the engagement with the community, we're going to go refine it. Then we need to come up with a definitions with terminology and taxonomy and lexicon for each of that. It is often the case that we are using the same word but meaning different things, and that's certainly true for terms such as bias. For terms, explainable AI is different people think about it in different way. So it's important to come up with a shared terminology, understanding, and taxonomy, so that when we are talking about each of them, we know that we are all on the same page. These two steps, the identifying building blocks and developing terminology, allows us to understand what it is that we want to measure. Then we can move on to how to measure, which is development of the metrics, evaluation, and benchmark. And this is extremely important because if you want to know, many of us have this quote of the Lord Kelvin on our walls in our offices that you can't improve it if you cannot measure it. So if you really want to improve the technology, improve the trustworthiness and enhance the trustworthiness of the technology, we need to be able to measure that. So metrics, evaluation, and benchmarks to understand those aspects of the trustworthiness allows us to have a better understanding of the systems. Once we have all these building blocks, when we have these three steps, allows us to have a good scientific foundation to go ahead and develop a risk management framework. So when we have these pieces in place, a scientific foundation and a technically sound standard for what constitutes trust or trustworthiness or risk. And then we know how to measure them, and we know what data to use to benchmark. We know how to measure performance and conformance. When we have all of these things, and then we have a really good foundation for development of a risk management approaches to AI, where developers or users for each application decide the appropriate level of risk or aspect of trustworthiness that they need, and be able to manage the interactions among those. What I'm trying to say here is that there is no one size fits all. What we are trying to do with this development of the risk management is to provide the right lexicon, terminology, tools, metrics, infrastructure for understanding, identifying, and therefore managing risk. So it's not going to be prescriptive on saying that or labeling certain technology as low risk or high risk or any of those. And of course, all of them will allow us to do a governance of the AI and allow for evidence-based policy development. So let's talk about the core building blocks of trustworthy AI. And this is the part that I said that this is what we have come up with the consultation with the community, and we're going to learn more through the responses to the RFI. So as I said, first and foremost, you want the system to be accurate, but beyond that, you want it to be reliable. You want it to be robust to the different and training environment, the data and environment not seen during the training. So your technique is generalizable. You want it to be secure to the different vulnerabilities of AI. I'm sure you had seen reports that when a post-it note is put on a stop sign, the AI algorithm is confused and I cannot recognize the stop sign as a stop sign, something that's very easy to comprehend for a human brain. This type of insecurity, this type of vulnerability can be abused or misused by certain attackers. So we need to understand the vulnerability of the AI and make them secure. Also, you might have heard that many of these new deep learning systems and techniques are brittle. They fail when we don't know why they fail. So we want to make sure that they fail safe, or they know when it's not safe to use the system. So the ones that I'm listed in blue, we call them technical requirements. You know, these are the requirements that more or less automated system can be developed to measure them and do the testing. But then we have the social technical requirements that we want to make sure that the system is free from bias, it's explainable and interpretable, which is two different things. It's privacy preserved and it is safe. And then we need, for each of this again, we need to develop the right terminology, so we know that we are on the same understanding and the same using the same term when we are communicating about these type of risks. And the question mark here is really that, you know, there might be other ones that we don't know, and we're hoping to hear as we engage the community in development of the risk management framework. And then beyond this, there are the guiding principles, transparency, fairness, and accountability that I have put around this technical requirements or social technical requirements, that we need to make sure that they have been accounted for, and we address them, particularly during the development and use to ensure a responsible AI. So what we have done so far, we have been trying to build some research program around some of these building blocks to understand what they are. And we always start, as I mentioned in the previous slide, by developing terminology and taxonomy, and then move on to development of the metrics. So on secure AI, we put a terminology and taxonomy for adversarial machine learning out now about 18 months ago, and then we moved on to development on, I think the best term to describe it is a platform for testing of AI systems. We develop it by, for the first use or first demonstrations of assessing the vulnerability of the AI, but the design is modular, is plug and play, so that it can be used for other evaluations of the AI. What I have here, I just try to put a nice image for visual pleasing. This is basically architecture of the systems. The link on the bottom is the link to the source code. Everything is on the GitHub, and we extremely encourage and be grateful for input and engagement from the community. Explainability and interpretability of AI is another topic. We put a document out, I think in August last year, on 4 principles of explainable AI. It proposed the 4 principles that I have here, that there should be an explanation, the explanation should be meaningful, the explanation should be accurate, which is separate and different than accuracy of the system. And the explanation should be bounded by the but what the system is supposed to do. We did a workshop to discuss the comments that we received on our document, and based on that, a revision of that document is underway. Since we work on explainable AI, again, through the engagement with the community, we understood the difference between explainability and interpretability, and the need for be more clear about what's explainable AI versus interpretable AI, which are 2 related topics, but distinct. And so we had another publication out, Psychological Foundations of Interpretable AI. I'm gonna make a guess, I think it's NIST IR 8362. And a webinar is planned in a week or 2, where the author of that paper is just going to come and talk about what's interpretable AI, what's explainable AI, how they are different, how they relate to transparency, but they're different from transparency. And very shortly, I just tell you that explainability is more around understanding the algorithm, understanding the systems. Interoperability is information about context, how the system, how the algorithm came up with the prediction or the output and outcome that they had come to. And transparency is more about documenting everything about the systems, all the decisions made and the reasoning behind the decisions made. I'll be happy to answer any questions and dive deeper during the Q&A. And then if I can go to the next slide, we did some work around bias in AI. We had a workshop in August last year, so about a year ago, and a document came out, and that was out for public comment until last Friday. We are very grateful for the very broad and deep set of comments that we received from many different organizations. And we were looking at those comments very carefully and revised the document. And we are also planning some engagement beginning of the year 2022. So you may come ask that, okay, how all of these things relate to the AI risk management? Remember the pyramid that I presented at the early on in my presentation. So if you're talking about the taxonomy of risk or building blocks of the trustworthiness, which by the way, I'm going back and forth between trustworthiness and risk because we consider them the two sides of the same coin. You improve the trustworthiness by diminishing or mitigating risk and vice versa. So we're trying to come up with the what's trustworthiness, what's the different risk involved, and then each of these publications, each of this research is trying to deep dive into coming up with the taxonomy and terminology and map them to the life cycle of the AI, so we know the touch points of this type of risks with the AI life cycle. So for example, the different AI, we call them AI actors, you know, the people interact with the AI, designers, developers, users, evaluators, have a better understanding of what type of risk they will be encountering. The measurement and evaluations is really our bread and butter at NIST, and we, as I said, we truly believe that you cannot improve it if you cannot measure it, as Lord Kelvin said, the purpose statement of the laboratory that I'm from, Information Technology Laboratory, is cultivating trust in IT and metrology. And we try to understand the technology, limits and capabilities of the technology, and there is no better way of doing that rather than evaluation. So we had a workshop back in June. I was talking with Doug at the beginning of the session about that workshop. So a lot of really good discussions, about what AI evaluation entails, what type of data we need, what type of standards we need, how to do the evaluations, how to report the result of the evaluations. And a couple of reports, we're working on that for release, summary of the workshop, next steps, and we have already started planning for trustworthy AI evaluations in 2022, some of them based on the discussions of the workshop, but also building on the experience of the other evaluations we had done at NIST. Some of you may be familiar with TREC or the text retrieval, the evaluations of information, search engines, and also biometrics, finger and face recognitions. Tying it all back to standards, back in 2019, we released a report, a plan for federal engagement in developing technical standards and related tools. That was in response to executive order that asked us to do this. And I just would want to say that, as many of you know, standards and technical standards are becoming, are gaining visibility and becoming a strategic priority and strategic activity. at the end of this report, well, this report talks about what standards, what's AI standards, why AI standards are needed, what AI standards at the time of the development of the report exist, and it talks about role of federal government in development of the standards and provide some guidance on how government can be engaged in development of the standards, and end with 4 recommendations. One is around do more research, because good standards, technically sound, scientifically valid, fit for purpose standards are based on good technical contributions. So we need to do enough pre-standard research so that we can have good standards. So one recommendation, not surprisingly, was around bolstering research and coordinations across US to develop the right scientific foundation for development of good standards. One other one was about doing more coordinations about what's going on around standards. And out of that, I got one of my roles, one of the hat that I wear is the standard coordinator across government agencies. We have developed a SWIG AI standard coordination working group under interagency coordinator for standard policies. That's a group that I think one of the OMB circular asked government to have. But the bottom line is that each government agency has a standard executive, and the group of those executives are the interagency coordination standard policy. So we engage the scientists, the researchers across the federal government to coordinate research for development of the good standards, but we also coordinate with standard executives because they have more knowledge and access of the people that attend standard activities. So good happenings and activities and efforts going on that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions and talk more about our contributions to development of the AI standards. Tying it back to the risk management framework, it is my personal wish list that after 2 years that's the timeline for us to develop the framework, we have efforts aligned with international development, international standard development organizations and their projects on development of the AI risk management framework, which is aligned with what we have come up with in, of course, collaboration engagement with the community. And that's one of the things we're doing, working with ISO, working with IEEE, and I'll be grateful for engagement and help of all of you with that. So I'm trying to wrap up. Our program at NIST, I'll talk a lot about foundational research to advance trustworthy AI and how we are doing that, but it would be amiss if I don't mention how that all of our, as I mentioned, we have a very broad portfolio of research working on material sciences, bioengineering. We are trying to understand the climate better. All across NIST, there are many projects, and our researchers across NIST are trying to understand how to advance AI in the innovations and scientific discovery of the research that they are doing. Benchmark and metrics to evaluation of AI technologies, I just talked about them, and we're hoping to be able to stand up evaluations of the AI. And as I said, we had really good discussions in the workshop that we had in June. Participation and lead in development of the standard to advance AI innovation, also talk about that. And this is probably a good place for me to mention that for many really good reasons, standard participation in the US is private sector led, industry led, and federal government are supposed to help industry in doing that. And that's exactly what we do. We participate in many of the discussions and development of the policies and contribute our technical expertise to hopefully development of evidence-based policy. And of course, like many of you, to do the research, to do the work, we need to build on expertise and resources to carry out our program. And I'll also briefly talk about our role with all the efforts happening in federal government, and I'm sure that Lynn mentioned some of this morning. So the risk management framework is a work that it was aligned with our mission. We were thinking about this, and we were in consultation with industry, and then we also got asked by the Congress. AI, a National AI Advisory Committee is one of the bodies within the National AI Initiative Office that Lynn Parker is director of, and that is a group of hopefully very top minds in industry, but also background knowledge of different sector and perspectives to advise the president and the National Initiative Office on status and research, status of the research and of AI in the United States. So it has a very long statute, and I'm pleased to say that the call for nominations for the National AI Advisory Committee was published in a Federal Register notice on September 8th. The call is open until, well, the call is going to be open, but the nominations that receives until October 25th, we will look at them and do a careful review and selection process for the inaugural committee. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Doug mentioned that I sit on the National AI Research Task Force, and I'm sure that Lynn talked about it in the morning. I talk about our role as a federal AI standard coordinator, and we participate in many different interagency coordinations along with my NOAA colleagues, and of course, stakeholder outreach. And I think that's, I'll just end by saying that we at NIST can do what we do because of our non-regulatory stature. As my boss usually say, we are non-regulatory, but we are not anti-regulatory. But because we are non-regulatory, and because we have a really smart people on our bench, we have the trust of industry to partner with us to do to deliver to the task and our mission that we have. And we won't be able to do what we do without stakeholder engagements. So as we have really smart people on our bench are, you know, we don't have that many people, and everything we do is bringing the community together and leveraging the knowledge of the community. With that, I want to thank you, and I hope I left enough time for a good discussions and Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, so let's see.
Thanks, Elham. That's great. We have 30 minutes that we can go through all the questions we got. We have like more than 10, I think we have 10 questions right now, but I'm sure there are more questions coming in while we are talking. So if you want to ask your questions, please use Slido. And also I would like to ask Patty to put Rob Redman as also a co-host, so we can bring him up as one of the people we discuss with Elham together. Thanks, Patty. And the first question bubbling up is that thinking about the responsibility to build public trust of AI, the general public has very limited understanding of AI. Do you have examples of other technological adoption or technical paradigm shifts where public trusts have been gained that we as a community might learn from, adopt, or borrow from?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think many of these great questions, I'm going to pass it back to you and say that the call for the RFI is open until September 15. And those are the type of questions that we really want to learn from the community about this. You ask about parallels with other technology and use cases, and there might be, I'm sure there are some. But I want to emphasize a couple of distinction here, and at least that for me was sort of a wake-up call that 10-15 years ago I just want to build good technology, good solid technical solutions. With the AI, we have learned that we are also responsible about how this technology is going to be used. So my job as a technologist is not going to be just come up with a really neat algorithm that can do things, but also worry about the implications of that. And we saw that, for example, NeurIPS, which is the main scientific conference for the area of the machine learning, starting last year, as part of their review process, add a criteria about the impact and is it a responsible impact. So another paper that could have gone through the review and get published, now it's not going to be scrutinized and maybe rejected because of impact. So what I'm trying to say is that one difference here is that we need a very diverse group of people, diversity in thoughts, diversity in all different dimensions that you can think about. But this is not we have passed the time that computer scientists and mathematicians would get together and develop some things, and then sociologists that worry about the impact of that. We need from the get-go have computer scientists, statisticians, mathematicians, but psychologists and sociologists and lawyers all as part of the discussions. So in that case, I think this is something that is different and we pay a close attention to. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thanks, Elham. I think I really enjoyed the workshop that you mentioned. It happened in June, talking about how, and one of the discussion happened to have that social scientists should be heavily involved in this process for the risk management framework, where within our workshop planning committee, we have 2 social scientists joining us in planning for this workshop. And also I want to bring Rob here who is the lead for NOAA Center for Artificial Intelligence, to share maybe some of his perspective on how social science should play in a role for the risk and trustworthy AI.
Yes, really good, hard question. First, it's a pleasure to meet you, and really thank you so much for supporting our workshop here. I unfortunately missed the June workshop because I was on parental leave, but I've been catching up through Douglas's perspective. Yeah, as we put this, I was just looking over our plenary sessions and our sessions as you commented on, Douglas, and we have a couple of great, one plenary on integrated AI, and then the next day followed by workforce development. And so those are really going to be, I think we're going to have some really critical, pivotal discussions in there about how do we not build an application and then try to explore its trustworthiness, but rather, I'm saying the same things I think a lot of other people rehash, but I think we're all kind of learning to make sure we are bringing the right people and all the right people to the table to make sure that, and also I'm going to leverage something Amy said in an earlier session, that it's developing trust for the end user, the end target. How is this going? How is this intended to get used? Who will it affect? Who will those decisions affect? And what are their vulnerabilities to? We'll say vulnerabilities and possible gains to a highly trusted, responsible application that can really help out that community. So I guess from my perspective, it really boils down to this integrated AI approach. And I think that's a term Douglas maybe coined, where you're making sure when we get started, as we go to collect user needs, convert them into requirements, start to think about the research that has to get explored and what the questions are, what research questions are actually going to get posed, and who's sitting at the table at that time, and making sure it's all, it's a really diverse audience of user experiences, as well as from different groups. So I think that that's really getting infused strongly within NOAA and the Center. And I think we have a luxury that the Center for AI is starting this in this last year, where social justice awareness is just so much more critically amplified. I'll stop there. I'll say it's a strong aspect of our center, and we're getting started. So we're going to make some mistakes on the path, but hopefully within good frameworks that are being developed by NIST and others.
Thanks, Rob. Hope it's manage your risk. Go ahead, Elham.
Yeah. I can add one thing. I completely agree with everything you said, Rob. And and when my talk was more focused on how build and measure trustworthiness of the systems, I'll point out to a really good point that it's at the end, it's all about the people that interact with the AI. So we can build really trustworthy system, but that doesn't mean that we are immediately have the trust of people, because as you all know, we are individuals and we trust or build confidence, all of us, in our own way. So a good amount of research is really needed to understand how to present the results to the people, how to help them build the confidence in AI systems. And that's something that we also started to work on, and we try to be better, but the bulk of our expertise as of now is on the technical part, but we try to push on this other aspect too. Thank you.
Thanks, Elham. I think hopefully both agencies with in Department of Commerce, we can work together more on this topic. And the next question is more technical. That the question is that, would you please expand on how the NIST AI standards effort link with other groups who are developing standards in this area? For example, IEEE, OGC, and ISO.
Okay. I'm not familiar with the OGC, and if OGC is that Office of General Counsel, then I don't know if they're doing the standards or not, but with the ISO and IEEE. So yes, ISO has, ISO Subcommittee 42 is developing AI standards, and a colleague of mine, so this is how ISO works. There are different subcommittees 42 for AI, and then if the subcommittee has multiple working groups, each of them focusing on different areas. And one of my colleagues is the convener for the data working group, and we look at the ISO SC42 documents, and we comment on that, and we plan to do it even more focused and be more engaged. As I said, we have to do better and more to engage activities such as ISO and SC42 and IEEE with the activity that we are doing, engage them in the development of the AI standards, but we also do our part by making the right technical contribution at the right time interval, because that's how ISO and these SDOs work. So that's what we are trying to do. That's definitely, we have been participating in those activities, and we plan to expand and bolster our participation there. And I invite everybody from the standard sides also to engage with the development of the AI risk management.
Thanks, Elham. I think just one of the planning team member had mentioned that OGC is Open Geospatial Consortium. So it's developing the standards mostly for geospatial data and industries.
That's actually a very good question, because the ISO is working on, okay, these are the standard lingo, vertical and horizontal. The horizontal is the activities that are sort of technology and sector agnostic. And during my talk, I just talk in a very technology and sector agnostic and neutral way, as if the bias present itself the same way for face recognition than for healthcare, than for climate studies. But we all know that's not exactly correct, and each of them, each of these vertical, each of these sectors and technology will have their own specificity. So we call them verticals, and we believe that you have to have some advancement on the horizontal side to build some common ground and a shared understanding, and then start building the verticals. So when we're talking about bias or definition of the bias across the sectors, we're all talking about the same thing. So in addition to the SC42 and IEEE, there are going to be many other sector-specific standard development organizations, such as OGC that you said, and thank you very much for telling me what it is. But also, for example, ASTM and different sectors for biometrics or autonomous vehicle. And we need to engage them both for standard development, but also during development of the AI risk management framework.
Thanks, Elham. And next question popped up, which is, are you looking into how trust varies by domain? And you just have mentioned several domains that may need this framework. And trust in AI for self-driving cars is likely to be very different than trust in AI predicting a hurricane, for example.
Yeah, another very good question. And I think that is for those, horizontal and vertical. And I think as part of my presentation, I put the emphasis of there is not going to be a one size fits all. So we are not going to get one framework. What we're trying to do with this framework is provide a shared lexicon, the type of questions that needs to ask, understanding of what are the risks, how they present themselves on the different stages of the life cycle. What are the different tools, standards, methods, and metrics for measuring each of these aspects of trustworthiness? But then each application owner, each user, each developer needs to come and look at these things and understand which is more influential, which part of these risks are more influential to the applications that they have. So as the commenter mentioned, I give some examples that, for example, let me just say something, and before going to the examples, even in the same sectors, the different level of explanations or the different level of sensitivity to the bias is going to be different based on the different applications. I usually use, for example, face recognition for law enforcement versus face recognition for unlocking our phone, or voice recognition, speech understanding for talking to my navigation systems or asking Siri to open up my phone contact, rather than speech recognition for measuring health. So the question is absolutely right. There is going to be the influence of the different type of risks and the importance of the different type of risks are going to be very different for different sectors, from autonomous vehicle to finance to healthcare. What we are trying to provide, again, think about this vertical versus horizontal, is a shared understanding of what constitutes trust, what are the risks, what's the, well, I tried not to say definition because I don't want to get stuck in the semantics and all that, but a shared understanding of what they are and how to measure them and how to communicate about them. I have no doubt that for different sectors and for different those vertical applications, some refinements, some based on the specificity of the domain, some more discussions would be needed. And we are hoping that allowing the time and interest as we develop the AI risk management framework, be able to engage different sectors in sort of test driving the framework as we start this, if you will.
Thanks, Elham. I definitely agree that the definition or the semantics of some words can change quite dramatically across domain, even within domain. So within ESIP, we have a data readiness cluster trying to define what AI ready data means. And in the data quality discussion, people have spend more than a couple hours just discussing what's bias really means in different sub-discipline within geoscience. So there are a lot of things that's a need to be specified and defined. And I want to pose this question to both of you. So this question is asking, how well or do large online vendors and social media outlets who have major existing AI capabilities align with federal standards and the regulations of AI, particularly around what is trustworthy? Are government and private sectors diverging given the rapid pace of change in consumer space, or the private industry versus the public sector? I know NCAI is trying to develop partnerships with private industry. So maybe Rob, I will pose it to you first, and then we'll go to Elham.
Oh boy, that's a good one too. It's a hard one, huh? Yeah, I mean, just being a private citizen, this is one that kind of keeps me up at night, wondering. We have different goals often, right? So of course we're in the Department of Commerce, and one of our goals is to enable commerce. That's one of our missions. That's something we need to do. We also need to protect ecosystems, and there's a balance there. So I guess as I heard the question, and I'm kind of thinking it through here, as we go to engage new or existing partnerships in the commercial sector, I think what we're going to have to do is basically say, show us your explainability leading to trustworthiness. Show us how this application is trustworthy. What steps did you take? And I was just thinking about this during Elham's last answer. Trust is probably something that changes over time, especially if your AI application is dependent on observations that are dependent on real sensors, and those real sensors may degrade over time and or see new things that they hadn't seen before. So I guess as we develop new partnerships, like really having a framework that we can rely on to kind of ensure compliance to known standards is going to be absolutely fundamentally critical, because then the commercial sector can do their thing, optimizing as they do, and we can seek out solutions and pull them in. That's what we want to do, harvest built AI solutions from ourselves and from the commercial sector, from academia, from everywhere. And we're going to need to be able to do that through I think through a real trusted framework, and then also ensure that we can remeasure and re-estimate the trust of the applications that we have deployed into operations. Those things can fall out of trust. But I guess that's my initial thinkings on that. Very, very difficult question.
Thanks, Rob. Elham?
That was a perfect answer, Rob. I completely agree. So again, as part of commerce, our mission is to promote U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness. And as I said, our purpose statement is to cultivate trust in IT and technology and improve technology. Our experience is that when such a framework exists, when there are tools and resource centers that allows people at different places and at different levels, from technical all the way to CISO, provide a lexicons and terminology to talk about risks, to talk about concerns, and along with the community develop resources as we just talked about, involving SDOs in standards, specifications on what needs to be measured, how to measure, and then Rob mentioned compliance and conformance standards. We did that for cybersecurity and privacy, and those are voluntary tools and voluntary frameworks. But we had seen how the impact on those to start conversations about security, cybersecurity, about privacy, and these all are useful and in the right direction to improve and enhance. Well, for those cases, cybersecurity and privacy, in this case, for trustworthiness of the AI. One other thing that I want to add is that because we run these processes as collaborative, open, transparent, and open to everybody's participation, and everything we put out for public comments, and we are very lucky and grateful that we get a lot of input and comment from different parts of the stakeholders, from the technology developers and industry to civil liberties to different groups. These are really documents and resources developed by the whole community for the whole community. So again, my hope is that by doing this exercise, as we saw with the cybersecurity framework and privacy framework, it will improve and enhance the communications about AI and AI risks in ways that they will have a tangible impact on improving the trustworthiness.
Thanks, Elham. And I think we have like 7 minutes, so we may be able to answer 2 more questions. One, the first one is that the discussion around trust focuses on development for creating a trustworthy operational algorithms. For example, is it trustworthy, this algorithm? If an algorithm loses trust, such as a failure in production or bias, and how might standards or test beds provide a path for regaining trust?
Yeah, again, that's can I go, Rob, do you want to go first? Okay. So again, another really good questions, and these are really good questions that we that we are working on this. So please share your inputs and thoughts during these open requests for informations. So my quick thought on that is you're absolutely right. AI systems are brittle. When we test them, we should definitely test them beyond the accuracy and worry about vulnerability and bias. But of course, as Rob said, it can change. The sensor can change along the way, or some other behavior, some other type of input that hasn't been studied may cause the system to fail. So the concept of fail safe is really important in AI systems. And the workshop that Douglas mentioned that we had in June, I think one of the panel, about hour and a half, 2 hour discussions was just all about safe failure and AI failure. So yes, important topic, good questions, and there should be guardrails around that.
Thanks. I think this is the last question actually could be answered by both of you. So I want to use this as a concluding question for our panel, which is trusted AI concepts will only be as good as those who abide by them. What can the community do to build in resilience and protections against bad actors or nation states who seek to exploit AI vulnerabilities? And who want to go first? I see Robbie is smiling, so maybe you go first.
I'll give you a shot. I'll give it a shot. Elham, your last answer, from my perspective, was brilliant. Guardrails, so critical. I think it folds into this one a little bit. I think that last question is something about, are there or should there be test beds? And I think absolutely. And those test beds should probably have some aspect of, within their software development lifecycle, continuous integration and test, along with independent human assessment. So how do we avoid nefarious use of AI applications? Well, I think the best way is really the pursuit of these kinds of responsible use and trustworthy frameworks. I mean, there's no way we're going to be able to stop users from trying to use, users who wish to, from trying to use AI applications in ways that is unfair and they shouldn't be used. But what we need to be able to do, I think, is be able to identify those misuses. I think I guess that's my take. So, I mean, it could be even accidental. You bring an AI application into operations. Maybe you are hiring a new operational crew. They're not as well versed on the use of these tools. They could make a mistake that could be costly. So I think really it's about having those guardrails in place. I see these two questions kind of together. I don't think I could treat the nation state nefarious use part. I'll be happy to have Elham address that if she wants to.
Yeah, another tough questions, and Rob, your answers were perfect and great on the mark. What I'll add is that, so on the users as individuals, I would say empower everyone by providing them the knowledge. So again, going back to the framework and this type of this, communicate risks, let everybody know about what are the risks and what they can do about this. And it can be that sometimes you just have to accept risks, right? But again, empower them by giving them the knowledge, by giving them the right type of questions that they need to ask and the right questions that they need to ask. Yes, and there are also things that it may be or may not be quite related to the question, but there are things that we can do at the technology and technical level to build models that are privacy preserved, to be better on federated learning, that you don't need to. Okay, so the right now everybody thinks that the more data, the better. You build a more powerful algorithm, which is true. But what if we can also think about ways to build models that we don't have to share a lot of data, through, for example, federated learning, or what other privacy preserving techniques we can deploy at the data level, at the model level, at the time of the developments and sharing and all this to improve at least the privacy. And on the security, yes, the same thing. Understand the vulnerabilities and know how to build more resilient systems.
Thanks. And I'm afraid to say that our great discussion have come to an end because we are reaching the top of the hour. And we hope we have like 1 more hour talk with you, just focus on data and how data is important for the risk management framework. But we will continue discussion like in the future events. Thank you again for joining us, Elham, today.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks so very much for having me.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks,
Thank
Rob.
You. Yeah, thank you, Douglas, for coordinating all these challenging questions from our amazing audience.
Thanks, audience. You can join the scientific session in 15 minutes. So we will see you there. Enjoy your 15 minutes break.